Welcome to the Destination Next podcast. This is a podcast hosted by me, Chris Hall, in collaboration with Styrkr. With this podcast, we're going to be celebrating everything endurance, supporting the everyday athlete who are maybe not necessarily in the limelight. People are now going further, faster and better on the products they're training with the equipment they've got. Styrkr offer a range of nutritional, carbohydrate-based products that are vegan and super friendly on your stomach. And you can use discount code NEXT10 at www.styrkr.com to get 10% off your next order.
Yeah, cool.
Otherwise I'll forget to start recording it, which I always do. I grew up in the middle of nowhere and I have no issues with living in the middle of nowhere. My partner grew up in Bristol and so was like quite central. And we knew we wanted to move out of London, but we're kind of trying to find that, I guess, compromise point, which is enough into the countryside that we could get into the Peak District quite easily, but also enough that there's still enough going on in Leek. Like you've still got bars, really nice cafes, nice restaurants. There's shops, and then so that was quite a big part of it. And then basically how we stumbled across this area was I did a ride in, God, what year is it? 2020. I'm so confused with years because of the...
I know, every time I was writing a bio for a talk the other day and I totally got 2020 and 2021 mixed up in 22.
It's just a generic blur of the start of the 20s, isn't it? But,
absolutely.
I think it was 2020 I did a ride which was 107 miles every day during the Tour de France.
Nice.
It was the 107th Tour de France. It wasn't the original challenge I wanted to do, but because I couldn't actually go anywhere, it was kind of what I ended up doing. And the reason for 107 is a lot of the projects I do are for a kids' school, which is for kids with cerebral palsy, and they look after 107 kids. So I think it was like I did from London to Land's End to John O'Groats to Lowestoft, and then Lowestoft to London. So that's basically going a triangle across the UK. And that's the most western and most eastern point and the most northern point as well, all kind of ticked off.
Yeah.
And I cycled the main road by my front door. Cycled along it and was like, this place is really nice. And then cycled through the town and through the high street to get some food. And at that point, I was actually riding with a friend of mine who lives sort of nearer to Birmingham. And he was like, oh yeah, I know this place. It's a nice town. It's like an old market town. There's loads of markets on all the time. And while I was doing the ride, I was like pinpointing locations on WhatsApp and sending to my partner being like, let's look here, let's look here, let's look here. And it went from being, because I think we kind of, the reason why we sort of settled on the peaks as well is because it's very central. I've got family in the Isle of Man. Some of my best friends live in Newcastle. My partner's family are in Wales and Bristol. And then some of my family's down in Kent. So that's the furthest one to go to. But in reality, to get a train from here to London is like 2 hours, and then from London to Kent is 45 minutes or an hour or so.
I just find the hardest part is actually getting to the nearest train station to get the line. Yeah. So we're about 20 minutes from where you are.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh, well, why don't you just get a train to work? Oh dear, how you're so naive.
Yeah.
We'd have to drive, I think, half an hour to Buxton to get the nearest train to get into Manchester.
Yeah.
Anytime we have to get any mainline train to London, it's Derby or Manchester.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, but it's beautiful, but we're really rural. And one thing that I'd kind of struggled with some of the winters here when you're this like exposed and windy, like no matter which day you go out, it's always on this road as well. It just seems every day you go out, if you're on a run or on the bike, you're just greeted by this wind tunnel every time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really, I find this is really rural, but we have just the most it's such a good little community. And I grew up really rurally in Lincolnshire, where it was one street of houses.
Yeah.
And that was it. It was a council estate in Lincolnshire, not too far from an RAF base. And there was nothing to do. There were some fields and a river not too far away, and that was it. So kind of no issue with being rural, but then actually as I've gotten older and you kind of need access to facilities like a pool, and if you ever wanted a running track or any of those kind of things, then it gets tricky, because whatever you do, you have to drive. And it's enough to induce an eco-conscious meltdown or something every time you go somewhere driving. But it is beautiful there, and I love our community. And it was this challenge that made us really, really want to stay here and make it work however we can, despite living in probably the smallest house in the village.
That's the thing, isn't it, that community for, I think the biggest thing we need to really say is what you did. I'm very conscious with podcasts, like my own podcast. This is like the first Destination Next one. My own podcast, I swear left, right, and centre.
Oh, please do. But unless we're not allowed on this one. Yes, please. Thank you. I feel so much better.
I think we are allowed to swear because
I think so.
It's me that's doing it. And what you did, what the fuck? It's incredible. Like, I'm sure there are many hundreds and thousands of people who have congratulated you on what you've done. And I know people who've done crazy things, but 100 marathons in 100 days, genuinely.
I don't want to be that person, but it was 101. Okay,
101 marathons then. Hey, you need to update the thing on your website then.
I know. There's a little thing that needs to happen, but there's a whole load of things that need to happen. But I've not added it to my bio yet, because I need to do some like Guinness work and stuff with data, and so there's so much data.
Why did you go for 101 then? Because I thought the reason was the distance.
It is. But actually, you'll probably get to know pretty quickly that I'm a bit of an idiot. And a lot of things that I've done have ended up kind of being a little bit by accident. The only reason my life is in this sorry state is because I'm a bit of an idiot. Things escalate quickly. And it turns out that I really, really like endurance specifically. And that could be swimming, cycling, running, but endurance. But yeah, it ended up being 101 by mistake, because the original challenge was 100 days. A friend and I, in the lockdowns, we through Centurion Running, I don't know if you know them, but they do ultras mostly down south, and they had a virtual challenge on a couple of times throughout the pandemic, where you pick a distance in the week, so anywhere from 5k to 100 miles to complete in that week. And we ended up doing all of them, and it ends up being 250 miles in a week. And so, but we tried to do them all as the single distance runs as well. So you'd be running a 50 miler on the Friday, and then on the Saturday, Sunday, you're running a 100 mile race, virtually. But we got looking at this new one that they had, and the idea was that it replicated their series of endurance runs as slams. So there's the 50 mile slam. So doing that would be 200 miles, because there's 4 races. The 100, 4 of those makes 400. The double is 600, because it's both of them. And then they added 1,000 mile in this time, and the challenge runs over 100 days. So we'd been kind of goading each other about this since the autumn. This had been spoken about, just the challenge, and it was just going to be, a bit of fun. It was probably going to be just getting long distances in. But I knew that I was fundraising this year for charity anyway, to do something every other year. That's kind of what started these ridiculous challenges. And I try and choose something that's, there's one phrase that I hate with a passion, and it's that charity begins at home. It doesn't. Charity begins where it's most needed. Right. So I try and every other year do something that is the other part of my approach to fundraising, is that I don't want to be somebody who only fundraises for a charity that's close to my heart, or a charity that means something to me, or that I have a personal connection with, because then it feels like it's self-motivated in some respect. And I think charitable giving, to a degree, has to work partly like that, because it's like the domino effect. Everybody does something that's related to them, but that inevitably, that approach misses a group of people out who doesn't have anybody to run for them. So I try and do something internationally, or something that I have no direct experience of. And that's how I started fundraising for refugee charities and sort of international charities, as well as sort of mental health or eating disorders, or, you know, UK based stuff as well. And so I decided that this was quite a lot of miles to not get creative with it. So I had this idea of a base miles, I think it was about 2,500. And I decided that I could probably use this. And as happens with some of my events, I went to Google Maps. And that has been the birth of some of my challenges before. And I got thinking, how far is it to Afghanistan? And I knew that was too far to complete in 100 days. That was significantly further. I think that was about 4,000 or 5,000 miles or something.
Surprisingly far.
Yeah, surprisingly far. And so part of that was actually just reminding myself where these countries are, because I find there's a lot of out of sight, out of mind in the UK when it comes to refugees and when it comes to charities like that. Because if it doesn't approach you on your front doorstep, it seems like a lot of people find it easier to forget. But I just don't, and I can't. And Syria and Aleppo specifically, and I had quite a bit of awareness from past fundraising, but Syria specifically was almost bang on 4,220 miles, kilometers. Well, hey presto, that was it. The 2,600 and odd miles. So it was basically 100 marathons in 100 days. But the plan wasn't always to do them as single runs. That came about 5 days into it. So because I was just going to average the distances, and it was going to be, hey, I'm running this far, and sort of document it as a bit of training for my triathlon later in the year. It was all a bit of a casual sort of thing, really, to be honest. I've never taken it too seriously. And then, so I did a marathon on New Year's Eve and one on New Year's Day. And I was just, you know, that was just going to kick off the challenge. It was New Year's Eve, and, you know, I had the time off work because it was the Christmas holidays. And so my official start date was New Year's Day, but I did a marathon on New Year's Eve.
So it's still consecutive, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah, exactly. So when we learned about the record, and when we decide, I say we because it was me and my wife, it's not some weird pronouns thing. You know, and sometimes do you think, if I say, oh yes, can you say them pronouns? Do you think people will start like wondering, why is she saying we? Yeah, we is me and my wife, because it was very much team effort. You know, it was all, I couldn't have done it without her, to be honest. Or at least had a happy marriage. So yeah, when we decided to kind of approach it as a world record about 4 or 5 days in, that was when they became, well, we'll carry them on then. But the first thing was, oh my goodness, how on earth is that going to work with the day job? I've got to work 10 till 6. So I've either got to get a marathon done, get back home and be sat at my computer by 10 a.m. I've got to do one after work.
I mean, I guess one positive that's kind of come off the pandemic in this situation for you is that I'm presuming you didn't work from home before.
Yeah, I did. I had my work model before was 3 days from home, 2 days in the office.
Okay, that's good.
And yeah, and that went to permanently at home. When we started back in the new year, I think it was about end of January, February, they switched us to 2 days, coming back in 2 days a week. But because of the fuel prices, they've actually allowed us to just do 1 day a week, which I thought was pretty cool.
Really
yeah,
that's really good.
It's really good. Yeah.
And how are they? I know with experience from a challenge that I did several years ago, which was 100 and the same for pace. It was 107 kilometers every day for 107 days. I was at that point, I was working in I studied architecture. I was working as an architect.
Nice.
And stupid job to do with anything that's endurance related, because your work hours are fucked, basically. And I think it was a week in, I basically, how I ended up splitting that up was quite often I was doing like 70, 80K in the morning before work, and then doing the remainder after work, because it was just trying to juggle it around a job that I'd be going into the office at 7:30 and then leaving the office at potentially 8, 9 o'clock. And I think it was like a week in, I got stuck in the office until 11 o'clock and I had like 35K to do. And I was like, I had to tick it off before midnight. That's the rule I set myself. So,
that's the rule. Yeah.
And that was a almost challenge failed. But I mean, they were pretty supportive of it in the sense that like they allowed me to bring the bike inside to the office, so I could actually, it was when I was living in London, and there's all that concern of like leaving a nice bike locked up outside.
Yeah.
It could end up not being there. And we were lucky we had quite a secure like courtyard, but you still never know. So they were supportive in the sense that they allowed me to bring the bike inside, but that was about it. But it sounds like, I'm presuming your job are actually quite supportive of the challenge as well.
I've got to admit, it definitely helps if you find yourself a boss who is also a long distance cyclist for the win. To be honest, the director of the company, my line manager, I work in financial services in compliance, and to be fair, they were absolutely brilliant. They just understood. They were really enthusiastic about it as well, and why I was doing it. And the thing that always makes me really grateful to people is when they understand why I'm doing it, and my motivation for it. And they totally got it, and they put information out about my challenge on our client emails down to all our firms. They made a company donation to the page, but my boss actually, for my DECA triathlon, which is in July, when we were obviously going back in 2 days a week, I was like, look, I'm thinking of cycling and back home. And they were like, look, just don't do that over the roaches. Don't cycle the cat and fiddle every day into and out of work. We'd rather you turn up to work alive. That was our IT director, who is also a long distance cyclist, thankfully.
Yeah.
So they were like, just bring a turbo trainer in and put Zwift on it and stick it in one of the offices. No problem. You can just leave it there. So I haven't done that yet, surely because obviously of being back at home quite a lot. But yeah, they're amazing like that. And actually, they're the best employer I've ever worked for. It's the first time I've had an employer from the perspective of job security. So anybody who is on the autistic spectrum or has ADHD will know how difficult employment can be, and how you probably spend a lot of your life panicking that you can get fired any minute. And they are just amazing. It's the first time I had an employer who just completely understood, and it just wasn't a thing. It was, they understood me as a person, and they're brilliant. And it makes a huge difference having a good employer to work for. Really a huge difference. So
and as you've already, as I think as well, as you've already kind of alluded to, your wife, having her as your support network and your community where you live, like, I am a huge believer that in anything that's especially ultra distance stuff, that community is fundamental to completing whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Whether that is, your wife, your close friends, your employer, whoever it is, there's obviously an element of it's in your head and you're battling your own self to be able to achieve these things. But I've always found personally having that, I call it sounds like a really like wanky thing to say, but I have a very close-knit group of friends, and I refer to them and they know it as my inner circle. They're the people that I confide in. And like, I don't think I could do a lot of the things I have done.
No, well, I've got my wanky equivalent, which is #Team Jayden. And so it came about so I've done a lot of 100-mile runs. And when I started out doing those, you always need somebody to help crew you or pace you, that sort of thing, in the night. And so it just became a bit of a thing. I didn't even start it. I think it started with one of my friends who was crewing me at the time. They were like, come on, Team Jayden. And so then it'd switch over to my other pacer in the night, and it became a thing. And so I'd always said that at some point in the future that was going to be a thing. So that's like what my website is, and that's what we use for everything. And when we went through this, but yeah, so my wife was just an utter rock, you know, and there were times where I know this impacted her, because the second half of the challenge, it was a bit idiotic to carry on, but we'd said that I'd made the pact that I would know my body well enough to know if the time was right for me to stop.
Mm-hmm.
But whilst I could carry on and things weren't getting worse and they were getting slightly better, then I would continue to do that. So day 47, I did something to my knee, couldn't weight bear, but I figured because it was so sudden that I'd not impacted it suddenly. So perhaps it was just another grumble and the multi-day thing, you know, you'll know that you have a
One
few
of those
days,
little
something,
niggles, it appears.
yeah, something niggles, and then it eventually goes, oh, okay, boss, we're on board now, it's fine, we'll show up and sit down. But you know, one niggle turns to another, and then there's another strain and something else. And so the second half, the first half, she could kind of go to work and just come home, and I'd just run my marathon in the morning and we'd have a normal evening. But the second half just turned into an absolute sufferfest. And if there's one thing this challenge taught me, it's that this British population is a bunch of sick puppies. They just love to see suffering. Yeah. Honestly, the best fundraising I did was the days that were the days where, for example, toe socks are amazing, right, for endurance running and ultra running. Yeah. But if you get them slightly wrong sat on your feet, the ends of them can blister the end of your toes. Never had it before until this. And it didn't quite, obviously they were just slightly too long, this pair.
Yeah.
And so there was one day where I had blisters on all four of my toes that weren't my big toe, on the ends of them, and it was miserable. And the pain was so off the chart that I said to her, I can't do a single update, you'll have to do this, because part of this was gaining the momentum of the updates, and people get invested in a journey, I find, when you're fundraising. You're trying to raise awareness of a cause. And so when I've ever done a fundraising challenge, part of my process is to make that, turn it from something, you'll probably get this, so people don't understand distances necessarily when you're talking the sort of distances that we're just au fait with. So when you say 2,620 miles, people don't necessarily understand that. Even when you say over 100 days, but people know what a marathon is, and people know when something's really far away that you'd have to take a flight to get there.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you invest people on this journey as you go throughout. And so she ended up becoming social media manager. She ended up becoming ugly tears wiper. She'd come home and because they had to switch to the evenings, and I switched my hours to my spring hours, which are 8 till 4. So in the spring I work 8 till 4, and in the winter I work 10 till 6, just to get that bit of daylight in the morning to help with training.
That's really good.
And and it was when I was struggling in the pandemic mental health wise, and I said, look, I just need some daylight. I'm really, really struggling. And they were flexible with working hours. So winter I tend to work 10 till 6, and spring 8 till 4, or 9 till 5. And so we switched the hours, maybe a month earlier. And so I would shut the laptop at 4:30. And anybody who is, well, the best phrase for this, and I'm so glad we can swear now, anyone else who's a finance wanker will know that job doesn't stop when your laptop shuts. It's a job that, and by the sounds of it from your job, is you don't get 9 till 5.
No.
If the job needs doing and you need to deliver that work, it needs to get done. So yeah, I'd shut the laptop at maybe 4:30, start the marathon at 5, and the second half, there was no athletic prowess. Let's be honest. It was just, right, tune in, guys. It's time for another 6.5 hours of me suffering on a treadmill, or that sort of thing.
It becomes survival, doesn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah, it was absolutely. But there was something quite, to me, that was where it was life-changing, because that was where show up, do the work. What are you really made of? What does it really mean to you? And I have to say that if you'd have asked me to describe myself, I'd have very much categorized myself under the dead hard northern bastard, but you've opened the floodgates with allowing this now. But the reality is, even I was surprised at it became not even just endurance, it's attrition. It was sheer just survival, and how tough are you mentally? And that was that's the bit where it really, really overwhelmed me at what I'd achieved at the end of it. It wasn't about a record, to be honest. Yeah, it was cool and all, but I think people get very driven by that sort of thing and get very obsessed with it. I used it as a way of making it harder and a way of getting people to understand the challenge.
Yeah,
because
that's
people
where it
get
becomes good. Yeah. Personally, I've never done anything to get a record, and I know that I could have applied various different challenges. I could have gone and submitted it to Guinness. I'm not.
Yeah, I've done that in the past. So like I did a run from London to Paris, and there wasn't a record for it. So the idea was, use it as a fundraising tool. I'm setting a world record. So yeah, if anyone else does it afterwards, then yeah. But I've never even suggested anywhere that I'm a world record holder or anything like that. They're just tools, and then you do the charity challenge and then you move on from it. And there was another one where it was a marathon challenge that I just took the record at the time and did a bit further. But this one became a bit of okay, I'm actually going to have to apply for this, because we spent so much time and effort on it in terms of the other stuff. But even so, it was kind of I almost didn't, it was a great tool for fundraising, but there's always a part of me that doesn't really feel comfortable with that sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm happy to compete in a race and for a podium place. I'm happy to try and get specific times, if that makes sense. But there's something about that world, particularly in running and Guinness World Records, it's a bit toxic, really. It's a bit it can get a bit ego driven, and the one thing that I'd always said was that absolutely can't be the case with this, because when you are trying to raise awareness for a group of people that's already marginalized, you absolutely can't make it about you. And that will become really clear. And so for me, endurance sports, I just happen to have discovered that that's something that there's something quite fascinating about it psychologically, but then there's also, it's become a bit of a tool for me to be able to talk to people about things that really matter. Whether that's, in this challenge, the discussions around Islamophobia, around racism, around refugees and what they actually go through, about challenging people's perceptions and potentially their own unconscious bias. And these are issues that I've challenged myself on first in order to be able to come to that point. So I'm not trying to be some sort of woke snowflake or anything, it's genuinely, how are people not driven to do something about this? So yeah, that I always really value it when people talk more about the why and what the challenge meant from an endurance perspective, because that was where you turn up, you do the work, and you remember why you're doing it. And then every now and then, if you're feeling a bit sorry for yourself, you'd plot it on the map and you'd see how far you'd come. And there's something about seeing a dot move on a map that's quite really cool.
Satisfying in a way, isn't it? Going back on the subject we're talking about, like, so we sort of discussed records, the mental aspect, a little bit of it. I can massively relate to so much of the stuff you're saying. Like, I completely 100% understand what you're saying and what you've gone through. And that point, I've always sort of referred it to it for some reason. I always end up calling it the nitty gritty point, which is the point where
absolutely, it's
the point where it starts to suck. And you're completely right. British people, we are sadistic bastards.
I know.
We love suffering. We love it.
Schadenfreude. Is it Schadenfreude? Is the term, or something like that? Yeah, they went nuts for it. I mean, to be fair, the fundraising was going brilliantly in the first half, but I tell you what, when bits start falling off, I posted a picture, right? And my feet weren't even, people didn't even see the good stuff, right? But it showed like my feet taped up with like micropore tape on the ends, because I had to tape them every day to stop them re-blistering. And you'd leave the tape on for a couple of days because it was an eco disaster at times, this run. You'd feel like, if you're constantly having to replace everything. And someone's like, I've made another donation just sheerly on the basis of the state of your feet. Excellent. Right. Start rolling out the feet pictures.
Yeah,
My
some
wife
people
didn't take too kindly to it though.
Some people have a foot fetish as well. Maybe that's the kind of thing they're into.
Well, we made a joke at one point. We were like, my feet need an OnlyFans account because we're missing a trick, babe. We're missing a trick here. There's somebody out there will be living for this. We need paid for this content. I'd be the worst Instagram influencer or anything like that because A, I'm too honest on reviews and stuff like that. And B, yeah, I just post all the gross stuff as well. But no, I didn't post any pictures on my grid or anything. But every now and then on the stories, I'd be like, yeah, but look at the state of this. You've had your warning, bosh.
It's a good way
didn't
of
show
doing
the
it,
worst
though.
ones.
Yeah, it's a great way. As we said, people in the UK are so, they love suffering, and I've always found with some of the stuff. I'm in a very lucky situation. I say lucky that I can kind of do these challenges kind of as part of my job. I'm lucky, but also I'm not lucky because it means it's the bit that I struggle with is it's very similar to you. There has to be a reason and a story to why. And that makes the bigger picture of it much more appealing from a brand perspective, from a donation perspective, from you creating this story to the challenge.
Yeah, exactly. And it's what your identity in some respect as well. Like, well, there's loads of people doing all these challenges, but what makes you different? What makes people want to donate? Why are you doing it?
Exactly. And that surprisingly takes a lot of mental capacity to be able to think.
It really does.
And things can take, things can be planned over years as opposed to weeks and months. And similarly to you, I try and do a big charity sort of project every other year, but I mean and then it's normally one year's kind of charity focused, next year's more race focused. But the last years have been very skewed by everything. And especially in the cycling side of it, where races have been cancelled, rescheduled, moved around, and spun around on their head, and it's just meant that some races are actually. There's a race that I entered in 2019, which I think I'll be finally doing in October this year, for example.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, really crazy. But that's the nature of the situation we've been in. But I think what you've done as well, and highlighting, I think what I'm going on a bit of a tangent here. Let me go back and reel myself back in. So I think what I thought really is really important about what you've done as well is highlighting that refugee point. And what I mean on this sense is we've seen this war in Ukraine. Yeah. I've got quite a few Ukrainian friends. When I worked in architecture, I worked with quite a few Ukrainian people and Russian people at the same time. But I'm going back like 2015, 14, like quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
And one of my friends who's from Ukraine was like, oh, this war has been going on for about 30
years and years and years. Yeah. This is not a new thing. Yeah.
And I think what almost I found quite sad about a lot, it's an incredibly sad situation. I'm not denying that at all. But something I found really also very sad about it is, this refugee situation coming out of Ukraine is not a new thing. There's been refugees happening all over the world.
Where were your Syrian flags?
Exactly.
Where was your Facebook profile picture for Afghanistan?
Yeah.
Where was your fundraising for Hassan in Syria or Hassan in Afghanistan? Yet the BBC, this news article that I remember one day reading out on the treadmill to try and humanize these stories. So this is one of the completely just. I couldn't have anticipated how poignant those charities would become, because it wasn't just the refugee charity. I pulled together these three charities as an intersectional thing, because the other two charities are refugee. So there's the Refugee Council, and then the other two were the Trussell Trust, so food banks, and the Hygiene Bank, which help with hygiene poverty, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was, so I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent like you here, but since you're allowing me the space to explain, not many people do that. But some of the reasons that drive me in these endurance challenges are sometimes when people can see what they thought was impossible, or those realms of human endurance, that it comes from the heart and the soul, that the ability to drive, the drive that keeps you going that far. People notice that and they ask why. And so pulling these charities together, there was an element of when refugees arrive here, the benefits that they're expected to live on, they're not allowed to work. There was very much wanting to raise and highlight the issues of UK poverty. Equally, you then have Brits who are in that same position, who are not able to get the resources they need to buy enough food. You know, they're having to make the choice between, do I buy shampoo this week or cereals? And nobody should have to make that decision. But I believe nobody should have to make that decision. Truly nobody. Whether you are coming here from Syria or whether you were born here. And so there was an element after the pandemic, people's lives had become so isolated and compartmentalized from one another. And humanity had sort of separated itself off, and it became at times a little bit every man for himself. And so when you look at trying to garner empathy for a situation, sometimes I knew that was going to be very difficult in the situation we're in before Ukraine was highlighted with refugees. I was fully expecting the racists to come out on Twitter, fully expected that, and it did. And, you know, they're not being racist towards me. So the least that I can do is just say, do you know what, can you not have some empathy here? But I thought deep, long and hard, and this is sort of the stuff that I do. You get this when people say, but what do you think about? What do you do for all those hours? And so the concept that I came up with was that, well, what's compassion? And so I thought about that, and you know, there's this theory that compassion is empathy in action. And so I thought, okay, so work this backwards. Compassion is the thing that will get people to give money to charity. Compassion is what gets people to go and set up charities and all of those things. And we need more of that, but we need empathy to get there. Well, how do I get people to empathize with this? It's difficult because the situation is not on their doorstep. The UK historically has, we live in a very racist country. We live in a country that has colonial roots and that history that means that even the best of the nation still has unconscious bias with issues like this. And so what I wanted to do was raise these lives up and these stories and make it human again. Now, to garner empathy, you need to make something relatable to somebody because they need to be able to and I think that was what happened with Ukraine and the UK.
Completely.
But to gain relatability, work that one step further back. You have to get somebody to understand. Once they understand, then they can relate to it. And once they can relate to it, they can empathize with it. And if they can empathize with it, that's when you get the compassion that happens. And so we worked all of that back, and almost everything that I did with fundraising and talking about these topics and raising awareness. So, you know, sometimes I'd be speaking about quite political topics, you know, about the Borders and Nationality Bill, the anti-refugee bill. And I live in a very, very conservative part of the world. You know, where I live specifically in this tiny little location, it's blue through its veins. And you find yourself talking about political topics, but the point was you making that relatable. So if you work that backwards and sharing that sort of knowledge, but when you see, I think, some of the hostility towards refugees, you sometimes have to look at why is that? So of course, you're always going to get people who are just shitty humans. So we put those aside for a second because you can't change those, you know, maybe step by step, but they're not the people targeting here. You talk about who are the people that we can talk to that maybe just don't understand or don't know about. It surprised me how many people didn't know about the information that I was sharing, whether that was information about the benefits that a refugee might get, whether that was information about the Geneva Convention and about the fact that they don't have to stop in the first country and these sorts of myths. And so I have a theory that I think sometimes if somebody feels threatened in the sense of resources not being available to them already, you know, Britain has this little island mentality to some degree that, no, you need to shut the borders, there's too many people. And it's like, I don't know where you live, but like, I know London's like that, but Britain is not like that. We don't have too many people here. You know, we have an NHS that's kind of broken because it's not being spent properly, but I'm not going to get political, promise. But do you know what I mean? So it was kind of trying to relate this side to this side, because I often found from observations in comments, in observations in articles that were written and the ensuing comment sections, that sometimes you would find that people who had nothing in the UK don't always have the same attitude as people who have nothing that don't live in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the attitude, and this isn't the case for everybody, but I found it to be a theme of sorts, was that, well, they're not coming here and getting benefits and you know, our houses and that sort of thing. So there seems to be a threat of some sorts. You know, are we trying? And I think people seem to have the impression that refugees are going to come here, have houses, have refugees, take the jobs. And if I could just pull these groups and these two stories back together and say, I always say that there's a beauty to be found in our differences, and we understand our commonalities and our similarities through our differences sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
We're often more similar than you would think, but if we can get past the differences, we realise that. And at the end of the day, a human struggle is still a human struggle. And by bringing both of those stories and those struggles upwards, you kind of realise that this wasn't just about which country somebody had come from. And it was highlighting those issues. And that journey that I took, every day that I took it, you know, I remember my boss saying to me, look, Kate, and he's absolutely adorable. Like, how is it possible for a cishet white dude to be that sickeningly nice? Sorry. Yeah, you know, I couldn't help myself. I had to have the joke there.
He sounds like a really good boss.
Honestly, he is one of the nicest guys you'll meet. And he said to me, Kate, you know, I mean, in fairness, I turned up to the office on crutches that day. So fair point. And I turned up with these crutches, and it was just to keep the weight off and try and keep my leg moving. And said, look, you're more important than any record. You do know that. He said, don't feel bad. You could stop, and everybody would think what you've done is amazing. You've raised an incredible amount of money, but if you need to stop, just stop. And I said, but I can't. I said, if it's impossible, it will show itself to be impossible. I will know that because something will happen that will show me that it's impossible. But until I know that it's impossible, I can't. Because every day that passes, it's another step on that journey. It's another person who engages with what you're sharing. It's another person who says, actually, do you know what? I've considered the way I give money. I've considered the way I think about charity. I've considered the way that I try and keep up to date now with things that are happening in the press around these topics. And I tried at all points throughout this challenge to live by my own morals as well, that I was promoting, you know. So I didn't have any big sponsors or anything. I mean, through this challenge, we've had a few brands that have got involved and have been amazingly supportive. But, you know, I didn't have a huge following. I still don't have a huge following. That's not what I'm about. You know, I don't have, because it's always been a charitable thing in some respects, but a lot of people have gotten to know about it. But we found that people just got behind it day by day. People started engaging with it, and in living my own practicing what I'm preaching, we didn't have anybody to kind of do, you know, things like matched giving or somebody to help out with, you know, huge charitable donation or anything. And to be fair, my boss gave a really generous donation. A friend's employer gave a really generous donation. But I think when you don't have that high athlete profile as such, despite training like full time and all that sort of stuff. So what I did was, out of my own wages, I said, hey guys, tonight I'm going to match every single pound that is donated to the website. And the first time I did that, I had no idea how much it would be, but I took the risk because I believe in giving fearlessly is something that I've tried to live by, particularly in the last couple of years. And it was £365 it cost me that month. And then the next month I did the same thing again, and it was about another £300. But I think when people see that you believe in it as much as you do, and you're donating as well, people really, they saw it. And I remember somebody saying to me, it was like a sucker punch. He said, Kate, I think what you're doing it's quite astounding. He said, you're raising money and you're putting your heart and soul into, sharing resources and information and everything that you have at the moment, and financially, to raise money and try and change the lives of people that you will never meet. They're not going to, and that was what spoke to him. And I found that really overwhelming, because I just felt like somebody had seen straight through into my soul. And that's the stuff that keeps you moving. That's the stuff that keeps you going. That's the stuff that makes you question why you're turning up, and why there was never an option to give up. That was the life-changing stuff. I always said that I felt privileged and honoured and humbled to have gone through this. Really did.
What I think it's, I've always found with the challenges is they become almost in a really weird way, some sort of form of meditation. And there's a benefit that you can gain from that in the long term, much more than you realize during the situation and during the challenge. And the element of giving yourself totally and completely to a cause that you're passionate about, really, I think one of the differences we have is I fundamentally fundraise for 3 charities, and they're 3 charities, and it is because they're very important to me, but they all are 3 very different charities. One is a children's school for kids with cerebral palsy, one is Movember, and one is Women's Aid, and they all have very poignant reasons why I fundraise for all of those, and they are, for me, and I've always fundraised for them, and that's I was, I don't know what, probably 15, something like that. But for me, charitable fundraising started because when I was a kid, my grandparents ran an animal charity, so it was drilled into me as a kid, and I'm very lucky I think I'm very lucky to have that background. But my grandparents ran an animal charity, and my nan and her sisters set this charity up, and my nan looked after
queens.
Cats. Yeah, they were great. My nan did cats, another sister did dogs, Auntie Betty, another sister
legend,
Auntie Molly, did like reptiles, and then we had Vera.
Excellent.
Vera, then Auntie Vera did all the, like, I guess, like livestocky things, horses, cows, llamas, that kind of stuff. And they ran this charity between the 4 of them, and then their partners sort of helped out as and where appropriately. And from a very young age, my granddad was always like my parents split up when I was very young, and I don't know my dad's parents at all, never really knew him. My dad's parents disowned my dad when he was like 15, so he doesn't really know him either. But my mum's parents, so even though when my parents split up, my mum's parents sort of really looked after my dad still, which was really lovely. But because of how my family was, like, my parents, neither of them really like gave me pocket money or anything, but my grandparents were like, we will give you pocket money for chores, like kind of like
God, I know it. If this goes the way I think it is, I absolutely love them. Go on, please. In my heart, I'm like, please let this turn out the way I think it's going to.
So it'd be things like mowing the lawn, washing the car, like cleaning out the cat pens and stuff like that. And my granddad would always be like, right, so depending on the chore, over the amount of time it took, basically, it would be depending on how much you'd get. So, for example, mowing the lawn, because they basically had like a farm with all the animals and stuff, mowing the lawn was like half a day's job with a little lawnmower. Ages.
The jackpot chore.
That was the one that everyone wanted to do, because you spend your Sunday afternoon doing that, and you'd get like a roast dinner at the end of the day, and you might get like a £5 for that, maybe, if he was feeling generous. And my granddad would always be like, right, there's £5 coins, for example. Now, 3 of those you don't need. What do you really?
Amazing.
He's always like, what would you buy with a fiver? And as a kid, I was like, oh, fucking Pokemon cards and sweets. That was it, basically.
Yes.
And he was like, okay, a pack of Pokemon cards is what, £1 or something. So you buy 1 pack of Pokemon cards, you buy yourself a couple of sweets, and you keep 50p for yourself, and the rest of it goes in that donation pot. And
amazing.
That's what they drilled into me.
That basic, I've taught myself that. So growing up, we didn't really have anything, to be honest. My mum counted, we would have to ask if we can put the heating on. It'd be, there's 50 pence in the meter, so no. And my mum didn't really have much money for food and stuff like that. She was on her own. My dad left when I was like 4. She remarried a couple of years later, but she was very much like that working class background, that very, she grafted to bring us up, to be fair to her. But I never really had that sort of influence of thinking about that. And it's funny because my wife and I have spoken about how we would try and instill that in children, because funnily enough, we can't accidentally get pregnant. We'll try, but no, so we have to, like, everything has to be planned out in advance, and inevitably have those conversations about how do you teach children about what charitable giving is. And the concept is the same, whether you're Bezos or Jayden. The simple fact is, I've said that in my own approach to charitable giving and fundraising, I'm not just going to be a person who fundraises, but who applies that to my own life as well. And by the way, I think the world does need to have that model of fundraising for something you encounter, because it's the domino effect. That's one of the fundamental bases. I just think that we probably also need to consider the other part, which is that's why I do it. But I do also fundraise for charities. I've done a lot of work for mental health charities like Mind, Beat, the eating disorders charity, a lot of those sorts of things as well. I've done a lot of work over the years fundraising for Beat and Mind. But yeah, I remember, it's funny because my brain tends to analyze things in that way anyway. And I do think it's one of the, I hate that people purport autism to be a superpower, because it isn't. It's absolutely not. But every now and then, I do feel really lucky that my brain works that way. And so I was so happy when you said that was how it turned out. I was like, oh my goodness, please let me tell. Please let his granddad have gone, so this is how much you need. Do you need the rest of this? And so, yeah, I've tried to very much apply that in my life in the way that I give. That it's and I'm not wealthy. I always say to people, I'm very open. I'm not even a high rate taxpayer. Because people can think, well, it's easy if you're wealthy. And so the only reason I make that clear is for people to understand that a binary number on paper isn't actually meaningful, because that amount of money compared to another person donating the same amount of money, it's this concept of giving sacrificially. And it's a life motto that I've really, really been trying to live more so in the last couple of years. And I very much took that approach to this challenge as well. And I would 100% not endorse running through an injury or training through an injury. And I am, as a serious athlete as well, I do have to put that out there, because I didn't know what the situation was. I saw a physio, got a physio involved, but I sacrificially gave to this challenge because it meant so much. And when you give yourself sacrificially, emotionally, your energy, I was living on a sleep schedule that even 20s Kate was not sufficient to cope with, let alone mid to late 30s Kate. I am not built for that shit anymore, let alone the physical side of things. Just no. So, when you give yourself sacrificially, not only does it change your life, it's life-changing when you do that fearlessly, trusting that at the end of the month there'll be enough money. But it speaks to other people, and living by those values, I think, in everything that you do. And in this challenge, I certainly think it got people asking why. But the endurance side of it, the psychological side of it, I just find thoroughly fascinating. That was the other element of it.
How how do you, so what was like the general day then? Was it, I mean, you sort of said you would be trying to do them in the morning towards the start of the challenge, and it ended up being more in the evening as you got further and further into it, past like the halfway point. And it was, the goal, as you say, was to run the marathon in one stint, 6.5 hours roughly at points, you're saying. What was kind of like the shortest and longest day?
So I'm very much at how not to run 101 marathons in 101 days. So
That's
pick the worst time.
Then.
Absolutely. And you know what? I've actually had people nagging me, like friends, runner friends, for years, since at least 2015. Kate, can you write a book now, please? Well, no, I'll know when the time's right. Now is that time. Once I've caught up with the day job work.
Yeah.
So there's the first half of that challenge, I thought impressed one group of people. The second half of that challenge impressed an entirely different group of people for an entirely different reason. So, you know, my training before this, you know, is very much tailored towards specific events. And the level of training involved, I was, you know, training for 30 hours a week on top of the day job anyway. And going into this, I just off the back, I literally finished the day before, on New Year's Eve, finished the Rafa Festive 500. But instead of doing 500k, I did a double. So I did the Festive 5,000k, like that's the thing. But and so I was quite used to that. But so going into the first half of this challenge, my fastest marathon was on day 21. So I started into this just kind of thinking, okay, we'll see where things are at, the multi-day stuff. And surprisingly, you know, my times have gotten quite a bit faster in recent years. So I was doing sub 4 hours every day. You know, every day I'd get up, do another sub 4 marathon. And that in itself, if you know anything about multi-day marathon running, that's bloody impressive. I'll say that myself.
Yeah.
To be able to knock them out every day for, you know, the first half of the challenge was like that. To the point that even, I think it was day 44, around 3 hours 40 still.
Bloody hell.
You know, my fastest time was 3 hours 34. Imagine, right? Imagine, get this, yeah? This is how comedy some of the elements of my athletic life are. Imagine qualifying for Boston Marathon and it not counting because it was on a jog around the Peak District before work. So the first half impressed a lot of people who were actually quite fast marathon runners because they understood what it took to be able to run, not just sub 4 as in 3:57, but frequently, you know, at 3:45. You know, I'd gone from not having a good grade.
For that is.
And 3:40 under 3 hours 45 is the female good for age time for London. And so I was regularly running that, you know, in the first half. The second half, when the knee issue sort of reared its ugly head and decided to take an extended break with us and make itself at home, meant that it became a run walk sort of a challenge. So before, in the first half, I'd get up at 4:45 in the morning, get out the door by about 5:15, do my marathon. You know, if it took a bit longer, I'd just log straight into work and crack on and then have a shower at lunchtime. Many a times. Often I've had to put clothes on over the top for Zoom meetings in work.
As long as the top half looks professional, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. Cycling shorts on the bottom because I've done 50k in the morning. I've got another 30k at lunch, and then I've got another 50k after work, something like that. But on the bike days. But the second half, you know, I had to do the marathons in the evening because they were taking over 6 hours every single time. I think there were only 3 out of the last 50 that were under 6 hours. No, maybe 5, I think 5 or 6. But do you know what I mean? It was like maybe 15% of them were under 6 hours. And so when you've gone from being deemed as quite proficient and quite, oh wow, that's quite impressive actually. You know, the amount of people that be like, yeah, okay, so you're running a marathon every day, but what time are you doing in it? And so I've just done 3 hours 40, and they'd be like, sorry, what? And so that impressed one kind of group of people. But the other people that I found impressed in the second half is where it became endurance. And endurance isn't about speed necessarily, because people can't always grasp that endurance, when it's at the very, very long toothed end of it, it's only understandable when it's relative, and it's only probably most marathon runners wouldn't understand. And so when you're talking about those really long distances, but what people could understand is that every day I was starting work at 8 a.m. and every day I was starting a marathon at 5 p.m. and I was finishing at quite often 11:30 at night. People understood that I was giving my entire day without any breathing space for myself. Every day for 2 months in the second half of it. And people got that, but it would be start work in the morning, 8 o'clock. So the second half, start work at 8 o'clock, often finish about 3:30, or as long as I could push it to get a bit more work done. Start the marathon by about 5 p.m. And obviously I had to finish them before midnight. I'd always said that even if for whatever reason the record broke or something, that I would, if for example I missed midnight one day, I always said that I would still continue as I could anyway, because although that's an official requirement, I'd always said that that would be my own standard as well, because that's today's job before midnight.
I agree.
And then I'd have, and then you'd have to do all the stuff like have baths, pop the compression boots on for a bit, because they're really bloody helpful. Things, because I didn't have time to go for massage. I didn't have time for physio. I managed to get a couple of physio appointments, but it really became suffering it out, doing whatever you could. So it became, okay, let's chuck all we can at this nutrition wise. Let's start just pouring smoothies in down me and cold pressed juices and all the magical stuff you could think of, we threw at me just to keep me together and going. But it was always the mental side of it, So like I say, there were two very different, taking away the charitable side of things, two very different reasons people were impressed either in the first half or the second half. And I think the other part of that is that people couldn't quite get their head around, but they understood, hang on a minute, you've just been in work for 8.5 hours and now you're going to step onto a treadmill or run outside for basically what people would deem a day in work. 6.5 hours is a work shift, and you're not going to get a lunch break in that 6.5 hours. You're not going to get a break at all, and you're going to have to do that after a day in work. Meal times get shot to pieces, routines get shot to pieces. But I found that really interesting, that even I'm fairly used, I'm quite content in my own company. I'm quite content being bored, because I can go into, a mental place where, people would say, how did you endure, 6.5 hours on a treadmill? Because the simple fact was, I'd have loved to have done more of them outside, but, being out very rarely, no phone signal, there was an element of having
a lot of elements as well.
Yeah, you had to take, I have been assaulted in the dark in a run before at a race. And for me, I just felt that there'd be too much risk, like you'd constantly feel on edge. It's very rural. You wouldn't have phone signal to get anybody. And actually, if I'd fallen over or anything like that, it was fine in the mornings when it was faster. But if you were going out at 5 p.m. until 11:30, up to, at times 11:57 p.m., you don't have many places to run around here apart from main roads or a couple of trails, and it's all quite hilly.
Yeah.
So the treadmill became a matter of, necessity, but I found it to be quite an interesting element of training. And I think anybody who's, I honestly think anybody who's training for a long ultra would not go too far wrong by running a marathon on a treadmill for the mental endurance training. I think there's something to be said.
Running, whatever it is, I 100%.
Yeah,
100% agree.
I've done the same on the bike as well. So over Christmas, because I knew I'd potentially lose a lot of my cycling fitness through this challenge, I tried to build a good base to begin with, to the point where for Deca, over the Christmas break, I did 12 hours on the watt bike, but it was quite a structured session as well. If you saw it, you'll probably have a wobbler.
But
I mean, to be fair though, the plus side is you're going to have 2 hours that you're going to need to edit the hell out of anyway to fit it all together. Because, well, the problem is if you give me license to go off on one about
that's perfect. That's exactly.
Yeah, like do a talk in the local village hall. They think they're going to hear about how many marathons I run, and I go full blown TED talk about my theories around how we change the world. Yeah,
I think that's incredibly important. Like for me, any kind of podcast I've done it's not necessarily about the direct obvious of what you've done. It's about what makes that and the bigger picture. And like we've already sort of mentioned, the importance of you fundamentally said it yourself. You train as an athlete and you work a full-time job and juggle your training around that, which is incredible. And I've been there, I've done that, I've got the t-shirt, and I'm only, I guess, in the last year maybe got a bit more freedom to be able to be a bit more flexible, which has helped me in the sense that I'm a big believer that rest is the best form of training. And that's incredibly hard to get that rest if you're having to work full time all the time as well.
Yeah.
So
it is. That's tough. And I think, sorry.
No, after you.
I was just going to say, I think I found myself in an interesting sort of space in the last, well, I was kind of getting there in 2019. 2019 was when I really changed tact and kind of approached things more as I would describe myself as an athlete rather than anything else. And I absolutely think, if you're doing sports, anybody is an athlete. But there was something different. What
level you're at.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. It's a mentality approach. But exactly. I think there was an element that I found myself in an interesting space in 2019 that I was training for an event that required me to train full time and work full time, because what a lot of people won't understand is that, okay, so they understand what a professional athlete is because a professional athlete gets paid.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is the pointy end that I am at within that endurance field, I'm doing things that no other British, women have done. I say women, I would identify as non-binary, but we're in a world where that doesn't really exist in sports currently.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in case anybody listening to this wonders, well, I thought you were non-binary, so why you're talking about women's records? Well, because until those other records exist or I'm allowed to set them, then I have to go with what we've got.
Yeah. Exactly.
But so for the purpose of this, that's why I'm saying that. So the sort of things I'm doing, the marathons thing, that was kind of a, other people will do that. I've done that, I'm sure. But the races that I've trained for, so there's this fundraising side and then there's a serious side. I found myself in that space that if there were a paid sort of career as that, then I'm sure I could make that work, because when you're looking at the world record in terms of a time for something,
mm-hmm.
when you're training for that and thinking, actually, if I put my mind to that, I could break that. When you're looking at events where you are the first person to do it, but plenty of guys have done it, when you're at that pointy end of things,
mm-hmm.
people, it's an awkward in between, because I'm having to train as a full-time athlete. I'm having to approach this professional life and this professional life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at the point, particularly probably the last couple of years, and especially this year, where I'm having to kind of say to firms, I'm wondering if there's any possibility you might be able to help me out. And going into that completely with no knowledge of how I do that. And amazingly, like, people like Master, which is how we met through Styrkr, a couple of brands like that, like, they see what you're doing and they understand the commitment to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's never going to be, if I was an Ironman professional, it'd be a whole different ballgame, because you can be a pro Ironman triathlete, but you can't be a pro Deca triathlete, unfortunately. Kind of glad you can't, because I'd probably retire by about 35 and I'm 36 in August. But yeah, it's an interesting space to find yourself in. And I think longer term, I said that I want to be able to continue this sort of legacy of things, of the good stuff that I've done. So being able to go and talk to kids in schools, kids that are 11, 14, those sorts of ages, even primary school kids. A few schools have asked me to go in and talk to them, of them understanding what it means to give yourself to a cause, of understanding what endurance means, of understanding what hard work and ethic means, that sort of stuff. But we're having to start thinking of ways, maybe how my finance job doesn't take all of my life up. Whether that's taking, considering the longer term options in terms of whether I continue full time, stuff like that. But it's that kind of point that I'm at, that although slightly different, I guess you probably understand some of that and the position that I'm in.
Of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it was very much a case of, so I worked in architecture. I worked in architecture for several years, and while I was working in that industry, I struggled really badly with depression. It's not a good industry to work in for anyone that has anxiety or depression, in my opinion. Same
with finance.
Yeah, completely. Very, very similar. And I was doing, quite often starting work at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and quite often finishing 1 o'clock the following morning. That was quite regular. And the first firm I worked for were not very good at supporting anyone that had any mental health concerns, or, struggling in any sort of way. And which was strange for a massive American corporate firm. They were really bad for it.
Yeah.
And then I got headhunted to go and work for an Australian company, which was great. I did that for like a year and a half, 2 years. But the problem with that job was I was flying from London to Toronto to Melbourne on a regular.
That's a recipe for disaster, particularly sports-wise, because you must have had, your training peaks must have been ballistic if you were using that. Your fatigue scores but they won't account for it.
The thing is, I wasn't really riding then at all. I only really started, I came quite late to cycling. I'm 32, and I guess I only really started riding when I was probably mid-20s.
Shut up.
Yeah. And,
really?
I
thought you'd just been doing it your whole life, because when I kind of heard about you and when Harvey put us in touch, it turns out I recognised your No Lemons thing, but I just thought, wow, look at him. He's an absolute fucking hero. Look at him and all these cycling stuff. He must have just been doing it forever.
No, I mean, I rode a bike, but I only really started doing things more seriously probably in my mid-20s.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense then.
And then when I rode a bike as a kid, I used to ride a bike. And then I used to ride when I was at uni. I rode to uni because I couldn't afford to.
Yeah.
As a student, I skint. So I basically cycled to uni. I bought a cheap, I think I went into a charity shop basically and bought a bike that was 2 sizes too big for me. And I was like, that's the only one I could afford. I hated it because it was red. I don't like the colour red.
No, me neither.
I find it very aggressive.
I hate red bikes as well.
Yeah. I hated it. I hated the bike. But it was my first bike. It was 2 sizes too big. And that's what I used. And I used to play rugby at a relatively good level. And when I basically was told to cycle to help with an injury, which was I dislocated my knee the wrong way. I didn't know there was a wrong way, but there apparently is a very wrong way you can dislocate it. And I was told to help with the rehabilitation of that to start cycling again. So that's when I started riding a bit more. And then, as I say, at the point when I was doing this, working for this Australian firm, traveling all over the place, that was the point where I think I was like, I have to kind of quit this job, or I potentially quit who I am as a person.
So I relate to that so much. Hard relate to that.
Yeah, really hard pill to swallow. And I enjoyed that job, but the travel was horrific. Because it was that was at least once a month, and at least once a month, sometimes twice a month.
And it's not just the travel or the work, it's the fact that your body has to get over the time zones each way when they're that far apart. That's not a European trip. That is some serious impact physiologically.
I mean, I put on a lot of weight. No, I really, really struggled. And then I quit that job and went freelance for a mate's company, and we did a lot of sportswear brands, retail stuff. And that was great fun, but that was freelance and on a sort of a short-term agreement. And then I went and worked for a more mainstream sort of retail brand, did that for a couple of years. And that was the point. That was the job that I was doing, the 107K every day for 107 days. That was the company. And when I finished that challenge, I went into that office and I was like, I've got to quit. And my director was like, why are you quitting? I was like, because this is shit. There's literally, I think it was pretty much my words to him. I was like, this is
excellent.
And then me and my friend then I became really good friends with a guy who was quite well connected in the cycling industry. And we sort of set up a little distribution company together, distributing products, and did that for a couple of years. And then the real leap of faith for me was I rode across Australia with one of my best mates in 2019. And we came back. We were both working for this company. We came back and we were made redundant when we came back. Right. And it wasn't it wasn't anyone's fault. I'm still very good friends with the people I used to work with and the guy who set it up. But the position that the company was in, we just weren't doing great. So we were made redundant, and he's now he's a massive cycling YouTuber and doing very, very well. And that was that point where I was like, do I get another job? Do I try and make it work? And ironically, I ended up getting another job working for a PR company. And then I got made redundant from that job.
Well, the universe is trying to tell you something at that point.
Yeah. And so the first time I got made redundant, it was kind of like, it was very understandable, and it was a really sad thing for all of us. And the second time, that brand, it was a not so amicable situation. But it's both points there, both in the cycling industry, and both companies were starting to sort of struggle a bit, because this was sort of pre-pandemic, going into the start of the pandemic, where stock all became a bit of a problem. And then brands just like,
and if you've not got that financial backing of a huge company, you can fold in no time at all.
Yeah. And they were both small companies, and they, stocks were problems, and, brands being able to put money into marketing stuff as well. There was loads of problems. And then after that company, I was like, fuck it. I'm just going to see what I can do and see how it goes. And yes, every day is stressful and a concern. And I do I'm and ah about whether, stability and stuff, but equally that's a very rewarding challenge to be in. I'm very lucky.
I guess that's the risk and reward though as well, isn't it? And I think I find myself in that position. I certainly related to the fact that, when you said you're headhunted, you obviously were very good at your job. And, it's frustrating because I feel like I've given, in some respects, my finance career. I have a very established career. I'm a pensions expert, and, I deliver training sessions to people across the country, and I'm good at my job. And it's frustrating because, I've been in the industry since I was 20. I had to work whilst I was in uni, so I got into banking that way. And, coming up to 36, 16 years later in the industry, and very well-established career. And so it's difficult to it's a hard pill to swallow when you're giving up something that that is familiar, that that you're good at, to how do I reshape my future? And I'm not saying imminently, but we're already thinking about, for example, I have had over the years, lots of people ask, can you write me a plan? Can you coach me? And I've had to repeatedly say, because it's professionalism and the right thing to do, that actually, although I've got the experience to write you the plan, I want to do things properly, and my qualification as it stands is actually only covered for groups of people. So we've already started the ball rolling with starting to establish things like the obvious stuff like run coaching and endurance coaching, but also trying to get people into sports. That's something that I feel really passionate about. So I have just enrolled into, as literally within the last 24 hours, to do personal training qualifications, because it's not a quick, easy win, but it is in the grand scheme of things. It means that I'm then qualified to be able to help people take steps on their journey, because I took a journey that started with one step, and this is how it ended up for me. But so there's the obvious stuff like that, but then it's trying to think about how you can do things. And I really admire what you've done, you know, I just think you've filled a really good space. I look at so much cycling stuff, and I feel like there are that many creatives in cycling and running, and where is the creativity?
Yeah.
And I was looking at your Instagram the other day, and I was just like, and it occurred to me, I was like, I remember hearing about this brand not too long ago, because almost without fail every month in my search list is searching for brightly patterned, funky, sort of quirky, you know, fun cycling stuff.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness. So obviously I'm quite, you know, I'm a female size 8 probably, athletic build. You know, the problem is you'd be surprised how many sports brands want to be size inclusive, but they forget that does mean more than just adding lots of XXLs.
Exactly.
Everybody should be included. And so I'm 100% for all brands being all inclusive. It surprised me when searching for female specific clothing, because men's clothing is just too big for me now, even in an extra small, because you can't find those sizes. But the patterns were just, there were so few brands that do that sort of stuff, and I don't understand why. And I've often thought about, you know, why, if you only spend that long on a bike or that long, you know, running, is it not fun to have fun things, you know? And
everything that I've ever designed has been on the basis of, I really like this for me.
Yes.
If other people like it, cool. That's what my stance is.
Yeah.
And, you know, you know, a separate from Zero Lemon being, there's the podcast side of it, the sort of stuff that I've released. I do freelance design work as well for other companies, but I only take on stuff that I think is going to be fun. That was kind of my stance with when I thought I'm going to go on this train of going freelance. I'm only going to do, if a project comes in and I look at it and I'm like, that just sounds boring.
It's got to spark something in you, because you have to want to do it every day.
Exactly.
And if you're taking those risks, then it has to be fun, I think. But I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. And it's like, it's one of the things with I think, which is really important, is, you know, finding whatever journey anyone is on, eventually something will click and you realize that you have to take a change in direction. And that is healthy and good and positive for everyone. Like, and it doesn't really matter what that change in direction is. But doing something for yourself, to me, is like when you get to that point, and that, I guess, that maturity even to understand that you have to take that jump to do something for yourself. It's probably one of the most rewarding things in the world. And I think otherwise, you, like, particularly, I mean, I'm heading to that sort of age where I'm 36 in August, and there's that particular time of life in, you know, a female athlete's like sort of cycle, that you've either had children potentially and they're grown up enough that you're coming back into it. Hence why those categories from age 35 through to about 50 are just 35 to 45 is the most competitive point for endurance and iron distance triathlon. Definitely.
But then you've also got the fact that obviously I haven't done any of that, and so then you face, how do I approach that as an athlete? Because the simple fact is, this is a part of me, and it's a part of everything that is now. You know, it's a part of me as a person. It's a part of my identity, and a part of, you know, if you took all of that away, I'm sure inevitably I'd find a way to keep it in my life through some method or other. But there's definitely an element of it's all encompassing, you know, to the point when we're looking at buying a house, you know, are we going to stay here and find an outbuilding somewhere because we need to put the gym into there, we need to put the treadmill, the rower and the watt bike somewhere, or are we going to buy a house that has enough space instead of a grade 2 listed cottage, which is completely not practical? But I think reaching that point as well, there's certainly a point where in running, I don't want to be left thinking, did I miss out on my potential? Because I only came to running later in life. You know, I was 20, I mean, completely, not even taking it more seriously. That's only been in my 30s, really, since I was about 32. But really, I started running late 2011. So I was 25, never having been a runner at all before that. You know, apart from last orders at the bar and apart from catching a bus, that was my idea of running. And the only thing that ran in my family is arthritis.
Yeah.
So,
same.
You know, and oh, who runs in your family? It's not so much who, it's what, and it's mental health issues and arthritis. And it doesn't so much run as it takes its time slowly jogging along, getting to know each and every one of you on a personal basis. Yeah. So I think any endurance athlete of a certain age, or even at that age where they think about children, and in our marriage, I would be the one that would carry our children. So you have to think about that. And that was partly why I decided to do DECA this year, because I knew that I wouldn't be able to do something like that for at least a few years afterwards.
Yeah, of course.
That gravitas, because it's a 12-day event.
Yeah.
You know,
of course.
It's the equivalent of a channel swim, and then, you know, not quite two John O'Groats Land's Ends back to back, but 1,120 miles, and then a 262-mile run. The training for it alone is the bit that I knew that I had to go into.
So much time.
Yeah, and that's actually, to be fair, that's the bit that. So in 2019, I did the 1 a day DECA. That was the bit that turned me into an athlete. That was where I started taking it a bit more seriously. I mean, all you have to do is turn up and do something sporty and you're an athlete. That's the simple fact. That's not why I considered myself an athlete, but my mental approach to that became different.
Yeah.
And that was where, you know, that level of commitment required, because you can't turn up to a DECA triathlon and wing it. You just can't. It requires so much commitment. But when I did that in 2019, that was when I started thinking about like that level of training. And so I then decided, actually, although I said I would, that was my first mistake. Never say never. When you see a marathon run across the line, they're like, never again. I'm like,
you wait.
Say that? You wait, mate. That's going to get out of hand. But so it's the training that's required for it. And training to that level is what changed my whole approach to everything and taking things a bit more seriously. But when you're looking at, you know, it's not physically the thing that would hold you back, because I certainly think there are more professional athletes as well now showing that you can still train while you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And showing.
There's been a lot of stuff that's happened with that recently. I just think from the cycling side, the one that comes to my mind is Lizzie Deignan, who, you know, former world champion, won the first edition of Paris-Roubaix. It all came out that she won first edition of Paris-Roubaix while she was pregnant with her second child. You know,
absolute legend.
And
you see,
example,
you know,
Eleanor Barker.
Jasmine Paris, and
there's tons of examples, and there's a lot.
And you're starting to see that now,
which is great.
So, yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, physically, that's not the part. It's just then the time, because at the end of the day, if you're going to bring a life into the world and be a parent, there's a responsibility for that. So I'd always said that going into having a family, I have to do that selflessly and you know, be willing to sacrifice some of that stuff. But I think we've already had the conversation as to how that might look. So it might just mean long stints on a watt bike, because, you know, that's the way of still showing endurance. You know, it might not be the same, but
as you sort of mentioned as well, like the indoor training is as much about training your mind as it is training your body. And the other thing about training indoors is structure and efficiency. Like the reason why I'm a big believer on it is you could do a session indoors that's say 3 hours, quite structured. It would probably be the equivalent of doing 5 or 6 hours outdoors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bear in mind, like coasting and
or
whatever, you can make it incredibly structured and much more concentrated. And in terms of the training stress, could be exactly the same. Like,
I did a lot of that over November, December. Well, November, December was a huge bike block, basically. I carried on the running, but there was a lot of bike stuff, and it was almost exclusively on the watt bike, actually, the turbo trainer, because there's so much efficiency to be gained. You can have an intensity factor on a 1 hour ride, some of the ones that I were doing, based on power zones, compared to a 3-4 hour ride. And there's a really interesting point that I reached with cycling over Christmas, that I kind of started thinking about how different endurance athletes work in different ways. So my FTP probably isn't deemed in comparison to the level of output that I ride for an extended period of time. Because in theory, so I had this whole, and gives you a lot of time to think about this stuff. But I remember once having some unsolicited advice from a male coach on Instagram, because he saw my intensity factor on the session that I'd done. So I write my own sessions in Trainer Road, and I use some of their pre-written ones as well. And so I was coaching myself for the triathlon stuff, and I need to get back to it this week, but I've had a lot of other stuff on. And I really enjoy writing those really technical sessions, and I really enjoy the structure. And I think, anybody who's time pressed, I'm a big believer in structure. If you've already got the aerobic base, and there's a lot of research and study to say that women naturally have that anyway. Women don't need lots of aerobic training. Those studies are now starting to come through, whether that's cycling or running. And so if you're time pressed, using that time wisely, that he saw some of the intensity factors on some of the stuff that I'd done, because obviously when you extend that period of time out, and the blocks of time within that you're riding at quite a high percentage of your FTP, it looks like you should be absolutely fucked doing that for a few weeks. But I thrived. But I think that it's quite interesting when you start getting into those technical cycling stuff. I really, really enjoy all the stats and the data and the analysis, and that's kind of partly what's made me think I'm going to start all the triathlon coaching stuff this year and the qualifications, but it takes time. Those take time.
You're like this graph at the moment, then. Fucking look at that one. That's a big jump.
Nice.
Nice.
You should see my training peaks going into this. Get this right. You will appreciate this. There aren't many people who I could say and explain this to who would understand.
Go on.
We all know that the fitness score is not a fitness score.
That's a lie.
Right? It's a lie. It's only fitness in the loosest grasp of the sense, in the same way that Boris thought it wasn't a party. It's not fitness. All it is, it's, for anyone that doesn't know, it's a rolling sort of training stress score over 6 weeks. So all you would have to do is one training block, have 2 rest weeks, and you like, people often think that they're losing fitness. And so in the 100 marathons in 100 days, I'd gotten to the point where if you're using fitness as a score, I completed it, mate.
I
couldn't get it to go anymore. It got to 300 and it went, I know, right? I think it went to about 320, and then it just plateaued, and it was like, oh well, it's just done. A rolling score now. You're done. I haven't even opened it since I finished, because I'm not doing it, because there's no point. I needed the rest. And now this week, as soon as, I've got life admin and stuff that needs catching up on, and I'm hating the stationary not being moving and stuff like that. It's time now. That needs to start.
Good boy. You're a clever doggo. He's gone back to sleep now.
Simple souls.
Yeah, he's sitting by the mat, like looking at me, and then looking at the door, and then looking at me, and looking at the door. And I was like, oh, I know exactly what this is. And we try to do this thing with him where if we let him outside, he just goes nuts. So it's like, take him outside, like stand with him, and then come back.
Yeah.
If we just let him outside, he runs around like a madman, and then actually doesn't do what he's supposed to do, which is just like,
as does. And then she just starts barking at people. I'm just like, Laura, if you've let the dog out, you need to not let her bark at everybody, because we're going to be those neighbours in the Peak District with the dog that barks at everyone. The Asbo dog. who's
Yeah.
actually really, really friendly, but she's clearly not that bright, because she's not grasped that barking at people does not attract them to you and make them think that you're friendly.
It was my partner's birthday yesterday, and I got her this card. I don't know if you can see it all.
I can't quite read it. The bottom says "Stay calm."
So what it says is it's just someone walking by. No need to panic. Everyone stay calm. Stay calm.
Yeah, dog's barking its head off.
That
Excellent.
sums up what this little fluffer's like as well. Is he's like, oh, a person, and it's wanting to say hi. It's not anything else.
Yeah, same. Yeah, that's what I was like.
Yeah, but anyway, I think like what I mean, when I there's definitely something about this whole women in sport, and the crossover into pregnancy, and like I'm a guy, like I don't know really. Actually, did I get pregnant? Is there anything now that is like Arnold Schwarzenegger style junior that has happened? Well, I could digress. I can't relate to that, because I can't be in that situation, but I can empathize with it to an extent. And I'm, and I guess in a way it feels like it's an incredible thing. And I think I'm very sort of, I know. I think I'm incredibly like amazed by it in a way, because it's very on my mind at the moment, having my partner's sister's just had a baby. I've got, Jesus Christ, how many nephews have I got now? Five nephews. Well, 4 and 1's due soon, nephews. And seeing like women in sport who are having kids and still competing at the top, whether it's
I think that's the bit that makes me think, oh, okay, maybe it doesn't mean, because I thought, so I qualified for World Championships and the European Championships for long distance triathlon age group level for a couple of years now. And I thought that this year I really wanted to pull on that GB tri-suit again, because I went to the Worlds in 2019 and none of my kit turned up in time. So it was just, I was honestly like my TT bike that was just an absolute pride and joy. Funnily enough, it was black with a bit of red on it, so I've had to have the whole thing spray painted, and it looks like a unicorn thrown up on it.
Perfect.
It's on my Instagram somewhere. I'll have to send you a picture of it.
Yeah, definitely.
But bike didn't turn up, so I ended up going to the shop. 20 quid a day bike hire on this road bike that's a man's road bike. Now I have the most ridiculous size shoulders. They're tiny in comparison to the point where even on like a women's bike, I've had them like my handlebars have been reduced in size. And I can't actually get the handlebar size I need on my road bike, but I just got last year. It's going to be a year wait until I get them, which is ridiculous.
There is something about I'm a big believer in bike fitting and making yourself as comfortable as possible, and I think that relates to a lot of the endurance stuff as well. And I do genuinely think that 90% of bikes do not come with the right size.
No, absolutely.
Right, handlebars, crank length.
Well, they always assume that the handle, like almost every bike you buy, and this just drives me insane with the cycling industry. Somebody needs to sort this out, because if you're a small man, you will also suffer this as well. Because almost every bike that you buy out of the box has 44 size handlebars, 42 something.
Yeah, so it's a 40, depending on. I think most brands the standard is depending on the frame size. If it's a medium frame, there'll be 42s. If it's a large, it'll be 44s.
Yeah. So I'm 5'7", right? So it tends to be, I think, a size medium frame, which inevitably, But even when I've looked at a size small. So I searched high and low and I wanted a set of carbon handlebars because it's my road bike that's going to be my good road bike. And it's taken me 9 years to finally replace it because I love my old one so much that I just didn't want to replace it. But it had a few too many chips in the carbon that it was time.
Yeah. We've all been there.
But honestly, but so, looking at bikes and stuff like that, and just like trying to find the right size of stuff. I wish, and then the logic that you get back is, oh well, people don't buy them. Really?
People do buy them.
Are you sure it's not just because you're not having them available in the market? But yeah, so I turned up at World Championships, turned up on this bike that I must have looked like I look at the pictures and I'm like this.
Yeah.
With my arms and a brand new wetsuit, and I basically had to run in the shoes that I'd worn on the plane, which they're an old pair of Asics Nooses, which are not my running shoe at all. Far, far, far too rigid for me. So there was nothing about this, not even a proper sports bra, because the only one that was slightly in my size. I mean, yeah, even that. So I basically had to pick whatever I could find enough to get me to the start line, basically, and a bit of beg, borrow, on a race belt and stuff like that, and a pair of sunnies. And so there's a part of me that wanted to go back and represent again, but this year I decided that, and this is where the financial thing comes in, partly I just can't afford it to do the Worlds and the Europeans.
Yeah, of course.
And then partly it's an annual leave thing. Because they're never in convenient locations. So I've said that I'll do the European Championships this year, and then I've just got to have faith that I can re-qualify again after. But there's always that. Yeah, we'll just have to see, because I think most people in my age category have done that stuff. They're not coming back from it. But the one thing that I think certainly doesn't seem to get risked, and actually from what I've seen so far, I mean, anecdotally, but then also there appears to be some science behind it as well, is that after pregnancy and childbirth, women with endurance, there tends to be an upwards turn.
Yeah, I've seen a lot about that as well. It's incredible, really. I mean, the only part of it that I can imagine, like in my head when I think about it, it must be something to do with, the pressure your body is under. Pregnancy, and then equally in childbirth, both physically and
I think there's a lot of impact with hormones as well. So even that, when I train, I take hormones into consideration in the way I structure my training. And even that, there's a huge gap. Like, I've never really seen many coaches, maybe one or two, that even mention it. And the impact of hormones on training, you have an anabolic effect or a catabolic effect. There are very specific sessions that you do and don't want to do under those circumstances.
Yeah, of course.
And so structuring your training to that degree, it gets, that's when you see some real progress, when you can start tailoring it all to that sort of event level. But seeing more athletes in the last probably 5 years particularly, we've seen more of it, and documenting them training through pregnancy,
and that's kind of normalizing it, which is really important.
It kind of makes me, I always knew that the medical advice is carry on with what you're used to. Now obviously for me that probably wouldn't be medically sound advice. But if that's what you're used to, but I think there's an element of, if you're used to running marathons regularly and you carry that on because that's your norm, you probably get some judgment. There is judgment. You see it regularly. You even see guys that believe they are entitled to an opinion on pregnancy despite having never had a child or planning to have a child. So it's good to see that more normalized. And I think going forward, I was always a bit in the back of my mind, I thought, oh, is it all too late for me? I've only started taking things seriously, achieving results, turning up to events and going home with trophies and stuff, like the 24-hour runs particularly. I started getting much better at those. I accidentally won one in 2014. I ticked up and my first attempt, I ended up with utterly horrific heat exhaustion in 2014. Nobody needs those details whilst they're eating breakfast, but the later in the September I said, I'd like to have another go at that, and I tipped up and I ended up winning the female solo category, and bloody hell, see that coming. But so those have gotten better and better at ultra running, and I still think there's a lot more to give. Now I'm training in a much more serious way. I used to be the person who would turn up to an Ironman, and I got disqualified one year because I had a pint on the bike course. It's the stuff of urban legends that, I got disqualified from an Ironman a month after the event, no less.
What? So that far after? That's I mean, it shouldn't be by that point.
No, exactly. And it was based on a picture because somebody thought this was utterly hilarious that this northern bird had stopped and basically said, "I murder a pint." Someone gave me a pint, and this was obviously pre-pandemic days. And I was like, "Go on then, mate."
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Best carb loading ever on the bike. And then off I went.
There's a lot of science in alcohol. And the restorative nature of a pint after. I don't drink, but I drink alcohol.
Well, I don't tend to anymore because of medication that I'm on, so I don't have a choice about that.
Yeah.
I'm not willing teetotal, I wouldn't say.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. Yeah, the beer is the perfect solution. It's not the alcohol, but beer.
Yeah.
Great fuel, absolutely great isotonic.
Yeah,
and it's also kind of fun, like running around with a can of beer.
Yeah,
it's alcohol free when you're on a run.
Yeah, there's so much. There's a lot of. It's a similar thing. There's a lot of research that's come out into that in the last few years, and we've seen, brands like I don't think now Erdinger, who have been sponsoring quite a lot of things. Lucky Saint now getting involved in it as well.
Yeah,
like there's a lot.
And then there's that athletic brewing company or something.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's quite a niche route to take, but yeah.
But there's a lot of information. There's a lot of things where that's starting to become quite. Actually, there's science starting to back up that and the potentials of it as well.
Yeah,
right. And I think like I think one last thing that I wanted to ask. I mean, you've probably kind of cottoned onto it a little bit. Like what the next thing is this nuts. It's just nuts. Challenge, isn't it? Still another nut on this race is the next thing coming up.
So Dakar is it's the middle of July, so I have basically got 2 months to just pull my bike fitness back, get the issue with my knee sorted run wise, but I've said to myself, well, I'll take that risk. Dakar is not going off the cards. I'll sacrifice the 145-mile ultra I had booked for the June bank holiday weekend if needed, which I think it will be needed.
Mm-hmm.
But Dakar is staying on the cards. Originally, when I was looking at that, I set my goals for the year every year around autumn time. Probably around September. And then I come up with a plan as to how I'm going to achieve them, because goals won't turn into results without action. And so I'm a big believer in deciding on your goals, writing them down and formulating a plan as to how you're going to achieve them. So my original, I remember, if I looked back through my Instagram stories archive, my plans for this year included breaking a world record. It wasn't 101 marathons in 101 days that I had planned. Didn't even know that was going to happen then. But the idea was that I looked at the time. So when you've got so few people that have achieved something, you kind of start wondering what is comparable time-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Now, quite a few women have done the continuous Dakar, but it's having done both formats that not many people have done. There are 3 other women in the world that have done that.
Yeah.
So I would be the 4th woman in the world and the first Brit to have done that. So firstly, the 2 events are quite different. A 1-a-day Dakar is an Ironman every day for 10 days. So the 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, 26.2 mile run.
Mm-hmm.
That is generally believed to be suited to a faster athlete because you have to have the recovery time to go again.
Yeah.
Whereas the continuous tends to be suited more to endurance athletes.
Yeah.
And I think having done the 1-a-day, I would actually agree with that, because I went into that with a marathon time of 3 hours 37 with an Ironman time of 11:49. And I still just finished it. So I had to put a lot of graft into making everything faster. But this time I wanted to explore how different the 2 are. I knew the training approach is entirely different, completely and utterly different. But I said I knew that the world record is 247 hours and a bit. So 10 days and 7 hours basically. And I started thinking about, could I do this in 10 days? So the swim, you get 24 hours. So let's say swim back into the campsite, couple of hours sleep, go again. At least 9 days. I'd originally planned maybe 4.5 days for the running, and then maybe, you know, sort of similar for the bike. How that will pan out with my issue on the knee now, I don't know. But I'm definitely going to go and get it done. And that was going to be my main fundraiser for the year. But the good thing about having already raised 41,500, I think, or almost 41,000. It's over 40,000, including the gift aid, far beyond 40,000 now. And we've just donated our wedding gift fund to that as well.
Amazing.
And yeah, so the good thing about that in some respects is it allows me to have this a little bit for myself, because I think it's really important to have your own moments in that way. It's not about everybody else. And I think that's easy to overlook that. So DECA, in some respect, it allows it to be a bit more of a, how hard are you really? You know, obviously there's still this, I'm still going to be fundraising. It just takes some of that pressure away from it, because I've always said every other year I try and raise, you know, given that I've got, you know, following for about 1,500 or something on Instagram, and my Facebook athlete page probably wasn't even 1,000 people when I started. So in theory, not a great reach, but reach is very different to number of followers, as we found a few times. And so having given everything to the 101 marathons and having not taken that for myself, I think it would be quite nice actually to just be able to do this and it just be about that meditative thing, like you said, you know, there's that, how do I get through this, you know, and again, and knowing that it's quite specifically, it's very lonely because you have nobody to ask. You know, I don't have any other athletes that I can turn to and say, how did you find the difference between the 1-a-day DECA versus the continuous? You know, there were 3 other people in the world that had done that, and they were, you know, I think they're in Switzerland and America, and they're amazing athletes. You know, it's similar sort of position though, not full-time professionals, because it doesn't pay. But you know, so yeah, not having many people I can call upon, I've had to sort of do a lot of reading, a lot of understanding of that sort of stuff, but then also calling upon people who are experts in their specific field or who have achieved amazing things. So Emily Chappell it was amazing. You know, I said about this thing, and she messaged me, and we had a lovely chat on Zoom, and she was like, well, I'm not sure I can help you or anything, but you know, we just had a lovely chat, and it was nice to speak to somebody who understood at least the bike part of it. So that's quite nice. So you do end up having to draw upon the experience of others, but I knew that for this I didn't want to be coached, because I knew how to do this, you know, and I wanted to coach myself but do a good job of it as well, you know, the technical side of things. So yeah, that's the middle of July. I've got an iron distance triathlon in June, but that's kind of a last, you know, go ride it out and see how things work for DECA.
Sort of like a testing everything, and you know,
exactly. Yeah. And I did the same thing in 2019. I did the same event in the Lake District, and it's just a nice weekend away. It's a lovely bunch of people, you know, and we do it every year, and we call it the Lakesman family. You know, it's you see all the same people, and you see some old friends turn up, and it's just a nice thing. And 2019, that was the time that I got 11:49, so it wasn't exactly Ironman Austria flat.
Yeah,
it was
pretty lumpy though.
Undulating.
That's a lumpy
it was undulating, but yeah, the flat bits often have habits of having horrendous road surfaces. So DECA's now the focus that is very, very much in my vision, and it's starting to get to the point where it's not just in my vision; it's starting to loom over me and say, about that training. Stop being lazy now. You've had your rest. Get on with it. So yeah, it'll be back to the pool. It'll be back to the long bike sessions. So yeah, bring on the 12-hour watt bike sessions and the 50 miles before work and the 50 miles after work.
Yeah. Incredible.
Much of that coming.
so much for talking with me for the last, couple of hours. It's been, honestly, I, as someone that is not a natural runner as well, I'm incredibly blown away by it. And I remember when Harvey at Styrkr sort of mentioned it to me, I was like, I think my words were, fucking hell, that's nuts. And
yeah, it's the impact of it, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think what you've done, take away the challenge. It's the exposure and the fundraising and everything you've done over the years is really incredible, and you should be incredibly proud of that, I think, definitely.
Yeah, I don't very often say that I'm proud of things, but we set out with the target of about 5,000 because I thought, well, it'd be nice to raise the fundraising that I've done since I started doing this. So I started fundraising in 2012, and every other year I've done something. So it's 2012. I think I might have done a little in-between thing, and then it was 2015, 2017, 2019 and 2022. So 5 big ones. And with the fundraising from this now, it's £76,000.
It's amazing.
And you just think, like, all I'd say to anybody as a final sort of thought is, don't let anybody tell you that you can't make a difference, because you can't change the entire world. And I'm not saying that I'm changing the world, but for somebody, their world will be changed because they can access mental health care for the PTSD that they've suffered as a result of the trauma that they've gone through in their journey as a refugee. You know, it means that families aren't making the choice between buying their kids a coat and filling the bath with hot water. It means that, you know, the teenager that's just started her period in school and doesn't have mum around, you know, can she can access those products that she needs potentially. And so it changes somebody's world a little bit. And for me, not being able to change the world and the sense of overwhelm is not an excuse for inertia. If we all took that approach, nothing changes. If we all take the approach that even changing things slightly for the better, incremental changes with a lot of people, the word that came back to me a couple of times in this challenge was as a collaborative. I didn't just pull £41,000 out of my own pocket. It was a lot of people who got behind that. And when we collaborate as humans, we can achieve incredible things. We're much better together. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Anna, thank you.
I've got a couple of talks coming up. So I need to probably get that all the bits pulled together. I gave it a couple of practice runs. Well, no, turned up to the villagers and put on this like little evening at the village hall. And he said, oh, you know, we're just going to put on a little bit of bar, and if anyone wants to pop in from the village, bless them, they raised 240 quid.
Amazing.
Lovely. And, you know, did a little talk for them. But yeah, it was lovely. So I need to actually get all my stuff together because I've got a few talks coming up at Grasmere in the Lake District at the end of the month.
Yeah.
And then there's one at the start of July in Wales through Wiggle.
Yeah.
So that's going to be fun. Yeah. So
Incredible.
It's good. It means it carries on, it continues. The message carries on getting out there. I'm still fundraising, by the way. The best way to get the link is not because I want followers. It's just because the link's quite long. It's a donate, give as you live link.
Yeah.
It's always in the top of my bio as the website on Instagram or the Facebook athlete page. So it's Kate Jayden Endurance Athlete on Facebook. And the Instagram handle is at Deca, DECA, Jayden, JAYDEN. So the link's always there.
Yeah, and I'll put links in the descriptions as well for that as well. So
perfect.
Somewhere under, you know, wherever it is.
Yeah.
It could be here.
Yeah, it just means that even if, you know, on the back of somebody listening to a podcast a few times, you know, I've still seen extra little donations come on the back of it. And that's why I keep doing them, really. Plus, I get to chat to people like you for 2 hours about endurance sports, which I don't really get to do otherwise. So thanks for humouring me.
It's endurance stuff or finance stuff. I know where I'd rather talk personally.
Which I prefer. And I spend all day talking about pensions. The irony, right? Get this one it wasn't my final thought earlier, but this isn't from the recording, right? But one final thought. almost, is that the irony, the sick irony of being a millennial who are basically financially fucked, who have lived their entire lives with stagnant wages, who will basically have to save almost 66% of their wages to have a meaningful pension when they're older. The sick irony of a millennial with a bike worth more than their pension, being a pensions expert, talking to people who have final salary pensions all the time. I really am self-loathing, aren't I? In more ways than one.
Oh.